Hey, so a little context behind what this video is and why I'm posting it now. There was a discussion inside of the Symphony of the Night Discord, the Long Library Discord, started by other members of the community discussing ways in which the tournament structure that we currently use for our tournaments could be improved for general prosperity of the community and generally just giving different notes about it. And while I wasn't the one to start this discussion, I wanted to provide some input as somebody who has been a part of the community for a very long time and has also run various tournaments for the community. So that's just why this exists. This originally was a text post that I made for the community to read, but I figured a lot of the people who watch me regularly might not have all of my ideas synthesized in one place. So that's kind of why this video exists. So I'm going to be reading out the entirety of this post, and hopefully you guys understand that this is just my own personal opinions and I'm not trying to start any drama or anything like that. This is just a way to get my ideas out there to a wider public-facing audience, because I'm sure many of you who watch me regularly enjoy what comes from the Symphony of the Night randomizer community, what comes from the SotN community, without necessarily actively participating in it. So this is a way to kind of give you guys a look into my thought process for community organization. So let's get into it. I've been trying to gather my thoughts for a while on the subject of how to best run randomizer tournaments within the community. Before getting into the meat of my thoughts, I want to provide a disclaimer. I do not want my thoughts on the matter to appear as if I'm unappreciative of any members of this community. I'm very grateful that we have such a fun and passionate group that gets together to enjoy the greatest game of all time on a regular basis. While I will be levying criticisms with this post, I do not want to diminish the fact that this community is very important to me, and I appreciate everyone who engages positively within this community. I'm also not trying to single out anyone or anything like that. These are general thoughts, not in reference to any one person or event. In fact, many of these criticisms are directed at myself and my previous events. My goal with this post is to hopefully provide my perspective as a longtime community member on ways I think we can improve community events moving forward. Thanks for understanding. I'll be organizing my thoughts into 4 different sections, including community, gameplay, prize pools, and cheating. As my disclaimer above shows, I'm very passionate about and very protective of the SotN community. The life I'm able to live today is only possible because there's a wide group of people who also share passion for this game and work to create cool things within this community. And I'm very grateful for that. I know I got lucky being able to make this game part of my career, and I want others to have similar opportunities to what I have as a result of this community's passion. So please understand that any critiques I have all stem from this perspective, wanting what's best for the community. And I'm well aware that I alone cannot decide what is best. And I do not want to be the sole arbiter of deciding that. But I do want to share my thoughts and let people discuss and decide for themselves how to act within this community. The role tournaments play in this community, in my mind, is ultimately a good thing. I think anyone who has put time and effort into providing an outlet for the community to get together and play together is trying to provide something positive for the community. However, I do think there are aspects of tournaments and competition that can have negative side effects. The things I mostly worry about revolve around the next 3 topics I plan to discuss: gameplay, prize pools, and cheating. But there are a few things outside of those topics I want to tackle that I think solely revolve around the community and how we interact with each other. Within a diverse community like this, I think it's important to keep in mind that we are sharing a communal space with others who want to enjoy many different aspects that the community provides. Whether that's a competitive outlet, a sense of shared nostalgia, an appreciation of the game's mechanics, etc. This means sometimes making compromises when it comes to organizing community events to appeal to different aspects of the community. And I think ultimately, it is up to tournament organizers to decide for themselves what aspects of community participation should be prioritized. But in my personal opinion, prioritizing the players is ideal for creating positive community events. The players are the reasons tournaments can happen in the first place, and without their hard work and skills on display, I don't think there's much purpose in hosting tournaments at all. The way I see the health of the community continuing, I think there needs to be ways to reward community members for the work they put into the community. Tournaments, in my mind, should be one of the mechanisms that rewards community members who focus on playing the game at a high level. And in my mind, high-level play is a huge part of what keeps the game appealing over time, as casual playthroughs can only sustain a community's interest for so long. I do think the driving force behind this community and its health stems from appreciating the aspects of the game that are difficult, impressive, and interesting. And to me, high-level play is a huge part of that. Another point to keep in mind is, while there is a lot of overlap, the community of randomizer players and speedrunners is not 100%. There will be some who are interested in both, but not everyone. And while my post is focused on how randomizer events can improve in the future, I do think some thought can be given so folks who are more interested in speedrunning the vanilla game can be given a communal outlet sometime in the future. Finally, I want to address both tournament organizers and tournament players about behavior and how it impacts the community. For those interested in hosting events for the community, I want to ask, what do you hope to accomplish by hosting this event? I think the answer to this question should help solve a lot of issues that could arise when organizing a tournament. For example, my answer to the question of why I host events is community focused. I want to reward community members for their dedication by giving them a platform to display their skill and provide an outlet for their competitive drive, as well as create a fun event to encourage players to spend more time in the community actively. This most recent tournament helped me be more active in joining races and communicating more regularly with other racers, which I really appreciate. Fostering organized get-togethers of any kind is a great way to keep the community together. Also, I do think providing monetary compensation for players' time and effort is a fine way to reward them, but I will go more in depth on that in the prize pool section. I don't think we have much of an issue on the community organization side, but I do want to say that I think it is important to be as accommodating as possible to the players. I think incorporating player feedback during the beginning phases of organizing a tournament is key to keeping players happy and providing a well-run community event. This does not mean that all events should be for all types of people, and having different events that prioritize different aspects of what players like about the game is a good thing in my mind. I do like that we have an array of event styles within the community. And as players, I do think we could do better to nurture a more inclusive community culture when it comes to tournaments and racing. It can be very easy to let our passion and competitive spirit get out of hand and lead to toxic behavior. I know I can be guilty of that. This most recent tournament helped me see ways that I need to improve on that in the future. While I think tournaments are a great outlet for passion and competition, as soon as those aspects begin to disrupt other community members' comfort or discourage people from wanting to participate in community events, then that behavior needs to be examined and corrected. I know this is difficult and can be uncomfortable to talk about, but I think keeping the overall vibes of the community positive is worth short-term discomfort and confrontation. While many of us know each other well and are comfortable with a wide array of behavior and communication styles, we need to be aware that we are not the only ones using this server. People can see how we interact with each other, and whether we like it or not, when participating in community events, we are representing the community. So we should treat that position with respect, knowing that our behavior and actions will shape how others view our community. Someone who is possibly interested in engaging within the community more could be turned off by excessive swearing, yelling, or name-calling. I personally do not want our community to seem unwelcoming to those who do not feel comfortable dealing with boys' locker room talk. I'm not trying to say that we need to be squeaky clean or PG-13 all the time, but just the acknowledgement that others might be less comfortable with crass or aggressive language is what I'm stressing here. And I'm aware that some amount of trash talk comes naturally with competition, but I think we should aim to be as inclusive as possible when getting together as a community. How you behave on your own stream is up to you, and I have no interest in trying to police that. But when coming together as a community, let's try and present as decent, respectful folks, so we don't alienate new potential community members. This next section will be dedicated to my thoughts on the gameplay of the randomizer as it stands currently and how it relates to competition and tournaments. This section will also touch on how the gameplay of the randomizer has developed its current metagame and my opinion on how that impacts tournaments and the community as a whole. I also want to say that I have nothing but respect for the creators of the randomizer, and I don't want anyone to think negatively of the creators of the randomizer just because what they've created doesn't perfectly fit the ideal form of competition, in my opinion. But with that out of the way, I think most players who have been following the tournament are aware that the current state of the randomizer has aspects that create problems for competition. While there are a lot of theories of how to mitigate the chaotic nature of the randomizer, such that skill expression can determine the outcome of races, I personally have become doubtful that making changes to the randomizer itself will solve the issue without losing a lot of what draws people into playing the randomizer in the first place. This also presumes that people want skill to be the determining factor of who wins a race or not. I've heard many people say things like randomizers do be random, lol, as a way to excuse the luck-based outcomes of races. Basically an admission that, if you choose to play a game with randomness, expect random outcomes. However, I see these comments as either severely lacking in understanding or just outright bad faith interpretations of how randomness can impact competition. Most people are aware that there are many skill-based games where randomness is a major factor. However, in those games, the outcome can still be determined by skill and not luck. I think the most obvious example that most people turn to is poker. And while I also made this comparison between SotN Randomizer and poker for a long time, I no longer think this comparison is applicable. Poker has many rounds per hand where players attempt to gather information from each other before winning or losing a hand. Also, poker players get dozens of hands before a winner or loser is determined. Basically, poker players get to use way more data to inform their decisions. Things like body language, betting ranges, bluffing, and mind games are all things that poker players can use that have nothing to do with luck. And these factors are how poker players gain an edge over their competition and snowball that advantage into a win over lesser skilled players. The poker comparison breaks in a few ways for SotN Randomizer. 1. There is no information gathering that makes a meaningful difference in your decisions. 2. Even if you could somehow use information to your advantage, the luck aspect of the randomizer would severely outweigh any advantage you can get from theoretical info gathering. In SotN Randomizer, we have no way to gather information during the game itself. The only information we are given is the information that the seed gives us as we play and the final time of yourself/your opponent when one of you wins. This means there's no such thing as bluffing or mind games in SotN Randomizer. All mind games would have to occur outside of the game itself. Something like "this person prefers skipping Granfaloon" is information assumed by the player that they gathered outside of the game. I want to stress that I don't think this type of informational advantage is significant in any way, but if we assume that it is, then that leads to a much worse outcome for the community. If we assume that information gathering outside of the game dictated a large advantage when racing, then the optimal way to participate in SotN Randomizer tournaments is to not stream the game, not share your opinions on routes or strategies, and generally not engage with the community at all. This, to me, is the exact opposite of what we want when creating community events. Thankfully, no one has intentionally tried this strategy for themselves, but even so, I imagine that it's possible that some community members do see this meta information as a large factor in determining who wins and loses. And for those community members, they might feel shafted if they put their information out there regularly as an active community member, and others who are less available due to work or other life obligations get to hide their habits from the rest of us racers. Again, I don't believe this to be the case, but if it is somehow very impactful on race placements, then these mind games, quote unquote, could be massively destructive for the long-term health of the community. And the reason I don't think this meta information is that useful is because the chaotic nature of randomizer seeds means it's near impossible to guess what type of information your opponent is working with when they need to make a decision. Things like "they always skip Granfaloon" assumes a lot about their route leading into the catacombs, as well as how well they feel they've been playing up to that point. Players who make mistakes early on can sometimes feel the pressure to play riskier for the rest of the seed. Even if you know your opponent is likely to do something like skip Granfaloon, you are given no information as to how well they've been playing up until the seed is already over. Personally, I've had many moments in practice races where I try to predict the route my opponent is taking just to find out that a mundane early game decision or random item drop completely changed the rest of their route. They even confirm with me that they would likely take the route I assumed if they hadn't found a different item or relic from me early on. Players can be expected to generally make good plays at any given time, and you can try and predict that, but what is considered a good play depends drastically on their particular circumstances in the seed. This also drastically changes depending on their personal risk aversion, which I will talk about more in depth later. With all this in mind, thinking that the randomizer is comparable to poker is something that I think is just false and gives the wrong impression of how much agency players have in the outcome of the game. This takes me to the next topic, which is the metagame of the current randomizer is toxic for competition. I want skill to be a determining factor in community-focused competitions, and I think we should all want that too. I want to argue that skill and agency should be the most important factor for competition when it comes to community-run tournaments. Otherwise, having outcomes be dictated by chance will be worse for the community in the long run. I know some will take a similar stance to the one I brought up above, that randomizers do be random lol, and we can argue over the perfect ratio of skill and luck all day, but I think it's apparent to many players and watchers that the current ratio is not ideal. I personally do not know what an ideal ratio would even be, but I do know that having skill be the dominant factor is important for long-term community health. I will say my perspective is colored by being a very strong player, arguably the best in the world when it comes to SotN. So when I say that currently luck matters more than skill, I'm actually saying once you reach a certain threshold of being competent enough at the game, you no longer need to sharpen your skills in order to see an increase in win percentage. This is the whole argument of quote unquote just get lucky. Obviously, if someone picks up the game for the first time, it doesn't matter how lucky they get, they will not have the prerequisite skill to beat the game in a reasonable amount of time. Once players have a moderate amount of skill, they can start to win races essentially by accident. And as they increase their proficiency with the game, their win percentage will start to plateau. And if the most important factor in winning races is outside of the player's control, then the incentive for players to push their skills is diminished, as well as their excitement to play the game regularly with the community. Why would someone care about practicing specific randomizer strats if it won't matter? If they work hard to master many aspects of the game, but their win rate stagnates, why continue to put work in to better yourself? Even if they are slightly faster than their opponent over the course of the seed, it won't matter if their opponent randomly stumbles onto a route that saves 7 minutes. This is clearly not the case for all randomizer races, but that brings me to my next point, which is the current randomizer meta has been pushed towards rewarding the luck aspects of the game over rewarding skill and decision making. So much so that I fear that it has become toxic and could lead to a retraction in community activity if it is not addressed. And I want to make something clear. The meta has evolved this way as a product of the game's design, more so than any individual's actions. SotN and its randomizer are just flawed in a way that getting lucky can give a huge advantage that will outweigh skill. So players who understand this fact, even subconsciously, have been pushed to perform riskier and riskier plays over the years as a way to gain an advantage. If I lose 80% of the time because my opponent consistently skips creature, then I'm incentivized to also skip creature. This is how the meta develops. The problem with this skip meta evolving is that it never stops. You can always try riskier and riskier skips for the chance to gain more and more advantages. And since you know your opponent is pressured to also skip stuff, you are less likely to get punished on any individual skip, which inevitably leads to a meta of pure randomness. If we force every relic check to become a coin flip of either skip or don't skip, then there is no logical way that skill will determine who wins and who loses. And I want to stress this point as well. Even if someone wins after checking everything, this is still bad. In this case, skill is still not the determining factor. The same argument can be made in reverse. They only lost because they just so happened to skip something that they needed when it could have just as likely have been nothing there. While this skip meta is not exactly new, I do think it has been pushed to its logical conclusion, with the overwhelming amount of practice races that have happened during this tournament season. Now, no matter how the game shapes out, the pressure to skip relics and force RNG to determine the outcome is upon us. Even if both players decide to check everything as a way to punish their opponents for skipping things and they perform the same route, the winner of that particular race is still determined by luck in a way, because the decision to skip or not skip any individual check is arbitrary. This is the conclusion of the argument I laid out about how SotN Randomizer cannot be compared to poker. And even if you think the decision to not skip is informed by outside game knowledge, then we fall into the other issue of incentivizing players to not engage with the community in order to hide information that could be used against them later. No matter how we slice it, the skip meta is toxic to competitive play and community health. However, I do think players currently still play the game, regardless of these flaws, because it's fun, and they don't really care about the results that much. And that actually is the strongest argument against my whole position on the skip meta. However, that is assuming that there is no incentives for winning tournaments outside of just playing for fun, which brings me to my next topic, prize pools. This is something I'm actually conflicted on. On one hand, I have a hard time feeling that it's appropriate to tell community members how they should use their money for their own organized events. On the other hand, I do think the amount of money and how it gets distributed could lead to negative effects for the community. This is a tricky subject, and I'm aware there's a lot of nuance to this topic. I think the most obvious place to start with this topic is how money has the power to incentivize people to engage in all sorts of counterintuitive behaviors. Obviously, money can incentivize players in a positive way. For example, I don't think anyone is upset or frustrated by the concept of speedrun/glitch hunting bounties. And tournament prize pools can definitely incentivize players to take competition more seriously. However, when taking competition more seriously, they will do their best to optimize their chance of winning, sometimes to the detriment of the health of the overall community. And community health relies on making sure the systems community members engage in reward and encourage pro-community behavior. This to me is partly why the skip meta is at the state that it's in. It has been determined the optimal strategy to go for in order to win, and I believe the incentive of the tournament's prize pool has pushed the meta into the state that it's in much faster than if the tournament was more casual and had little to no prize support. But I don't think this is something to hold against the tournament in any way. This is just a consequence of encouraging more activity, which led to a deeper development of this meta. The money was fuel on the fire that was already burning in the background. I do think large sums of money also put a lot of pressure on community members to perform, especially if they themselves are in a desperate financial situation. I don't personally feel equipped to handle this topic all too well, as I, in the grand scheme of things, am doing fine right now. And the SotN community is international, spanning all sorts of backgrounds. For me, the difference between winning and losing a few $100s can feel bad, but I cannot imagine the feeling of losing out on potentially life-changing amounts of money if I was living in a country where USD is significantly more valuable than my native currency. Something I feel more comfortable speaking on, however, is the potential for large prize pools to impact sportsmanship in the community. Specifically, large prize pools can incentivize cheating. I want to be clear, I am not making any accusations and have no interest in doing so. I just want to bring attention to the current situation and the community's lack of safeguards against cheating currently. I also don't want to make excuses for anyone who cheats. That is ultimately their decision, and the blame is on them if they decide to do so. But I do think that the current state of the SotN community and the tournament itself has created a perfect storm to incentivize cheating. With a randomizer that is very much luck focused and a large enough prize pool that has the potential to grant life-changing amounts of money, I think the incentive for someone to try and cheat their way to a tournament win is most certainly there. And I think the way the community operates currently is very unprepared to protect ourselves from potential cheating. I think the current fail-safes are also very minor and mostly consist of trust in our fellow community members. And while it's a nice thought to assume that no one will cheat within the community, I do think the combination of the availability of undetectable cheats and a very large prize pool is a disaster waiting to happen. Here are just two potential potential ways to very easily cheat in the current environment that we as a community are not prepared for. Obviously, I do not condone this behavior and do not want people to cheat, but I think this discussion needs to happen at some point, and these cheats are not exactly difficult to think of on your own. I'm only bringing these up to highlight how vulnerable the community currently is. First is stream sniping. I shouldn't need to explain what stream sniping is, and with the way we currently host races, there is no mechanism in place to prevent somebody from easily watching the opponent's stream during a tournament race undetected. Making decisions based on information you got from stream sniping is very easy to explain away after the fact, so you don't get caught, especially in the current skip meta. Cheating or not, route explanations currently are never 100% logical, so any sort of miraculous relic skip can be explained with answers like, I thought they would skip that check too, or I felt behind, so I had to make a play. And if the stream sniping player proactively skips a relic that turns out to be required for finishing the seed, they could find time to grab it later and excuse their strange routing decisions by saying, I was scared to leave something behind. We cannot use routing or decision making to assume someone is stream sniping, so long as they aren't obvious about it, which makes it impossible to stop currently. Scouting. The delay between supplying the players with the seed they will be racing and starting the race can give players the opportunity to scout a few relic locations before starting the official race, letting them know exactly which places to skip or not skip. There also exists a lot of widely available debug tools that allow you to do this much faster than playing the game normally. There's nothing stopping a player from saying, I need to use the bathroom after the seed has been posted, then use no clip or start anywhere codes to scout out important relic locations before starting the race. I can imagine all the relics in the game could easily be scouted in under a few minutes. And again, the choice to skip or not skip any relic location is arbitrary, so there's no way to tell from the cheater's gameplay if they had information they weren't supposed to have. Why is it so hard to stop these cheats? Sadly, attempting basic precautions to try and prevent players from stream sniping or scouting will likely not be sufficient. If you force the tournament streams to be delayed by several minutes, there is still the potential for information to be gathered from early parts of the run, before it gets too late and the cheater has to make a definitive decision to skip those relic checks. A cheater could intentionally skip early checks like Power of Wolf and the Warlock preset. They could then check on the stream 10 minutes later to find out that the relic is worth skipping permanently, or if they have to route that relic in later. Even if you force runners to not stream publicly at all, and the matches are streamed directly to the TO and recorded only, the possibility of scouting is still there. And even if you force players to play almost immediately after getting their seeds, the potential for an accomplice to scout for the cheating player and feed them information about the seed is still possible. My conclusion to this whole discussion about improving tournament procedures moving forward is sadly bleak. However, I do think that this community is filled with very smart individuals who are more than capable of taking my thoughts on the subject and will consider them in the discussions we have moving forward. I'm not hopeless that these issues will never be fixed, but I do currently see that it is a very difficult problem to solve anytime soon. I think the overall takeaway from this post I want to see the community focus on in the future is, how can we incentivize community members to participate in community events in a positive way, and how can we protect the community from potentially toxic behavior? I would also love to hear people's ideas of how to improve issues that I've brought up with this post, like how to best handle the balance luck plays in competitive randomizer tournaments. How do we responsibly reward players for their dedication to the community? And how does that relate to appropriate prize support for community tournaments? And what can we do to prevent the possibility of cheating taking place in our community events?